Marina Watson realized this wasn't just an interview when she met a biased recruiter. But how would he react when he learned she was the new CEO? Her next move shocked everyone. Marina Watson, a successful and confident black woman, approached the office of one of the city's leading companies. At 40 years old, she had decades of hard work, many victories, and numerous goals achieved behind her. She was one of the few who could boast about recently signing a contract to become the company's CEO. However, this appointment was kept secret. No one in the company, except the board of directors, knew about it. Marina decided to use this opportunity to secretly test how new hires and ordinary candidates were treated during interviews. She chose a modest yet elegant outfit that highlighted her professionalism without making her stand out. To others, she was just an ordinary candidate for a typical position. Her confidence kept her calm, even as she entered the waiting room, where the tension was palpable. Several employees and candidates glanced at her with mild disdain, an attitude she had encountered many times in her career, which no longer caused her any anxiety or doubt. She simply took a seat, maintaining perfect posture and calmness as she awaited her turn. Minutes dragged by, but finally, a young employee nervously approached her and invited her into the recruiter's office. As she stepped inside, Marina immediately sensed the cold professionalism tinged with irritation. The recruiter, a 45-year-old man named Jack Pearson, didn't bother to stand up or greet her warmly. His icy gaze swept over Marina, and she instantly knew this man wasn't interested in evaluating her qualifications objectively. He clearly hadn't expected to see someone like her. "Well, did you fill out all the necessary documents?" Jack asked, not even bothering to make eye contact. His tone was dry and distant, and his face expressed irritation, as if her presence in his office was an inconvenience. Marina, holding back her inner discomfort, calmly handed him the folder with the documents, trying not to show the increasing tension she felt. Jack lazily took the folder, rolling his eyes as if the entire process was just a formality, and he already knew she had nothing to offer. Inside, Marina realized her expectations were correct. Discrimination and bias were evident. However, she didn't let it show, maintaining her composure. Her real test had just begun, and she was ready for anything. Jack barely glanced at Marina's resume, flipping through it mechanically, as if it were just a formality. His eyes quickly skimmed the top lines, but instead of diving into her accomplishments, he focused on general, unimpressive details. His interest seemed to lie more in ending the interview quickly than in assessing her qualifications. "So, you worked at your previous company for a few years," he said, pausing. "But where do you see yourself in 5 years?" The question was standard and shallow, as though Jack hadn't even thought about how to ask it. He didn't inquire about the strategies Marina had managed, wasn't interested in her leadership qualities, or in the successes she had brought to her former employers. It was as if he was intentionally avoiding the details that would have made her a strong contender for any position. Marina, keeping her composure, began to speak about her key achievements, such as increasing her previous company's profits by 20% or successfully leading projects in a highly competitive environment. But as soon as she started talking, Jack interrupted her, quickly shifting the conversation to trivial aspects of her resume. "You mentioned you had a gap in your employment. Can you explain what you were doing during that time?" he asked with a hint of suspicion, ignoring the fact that the gap was related to her professional development and important life projects. Marina realized that he was steering the conversation away from the important points, and that Jack was deliberately overlooking her accomplishments. His questions weren't designed to genuinely understand her as a candidate, but rather to create the appearance of a formal interview while denying her the chance to showcase her strengths. It soon became clear that Jack was skeptical of her and had no intention of seriously considering her application. "You know," he began, squinting slightly in a mocking tone, "in our company, we prefer candidates who fit our corporate culture. I'm not sure you're right for this role." His words sounded like a biased judgment. Jack wasn't focusing on her professionalism, but on something less tangible, giving him a way to avoid being specific. Marina, well aware of these games, decided to dig deeper into what exactly he meant. "What do you mean by corporate culture?" she calmly asked, looking him straight in the eyes. Jack smirked, but didn't give a direct answer. He offered vague phrases, implying that she didn't fit the spirit of the company, without providing any real arguments. It was obvious that he was avoiding discussing her actual skills and experience. His behavior felt forced, and his responses were evasive. This wasn't an interview, but a meeting Jack wanted to end as soon as possible. "I think we've covered everything," he concluded, closing her resume folder, without offering any next steps or questions about her readiness for the next phase. Marina left the office, outwardly calm, though inside she knew she had just encountered blatant discrimination. As Marina was about to leave the office, she paused at the door, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Thoughts raced through her mind about the obvious bias Jack had shown. Her experience, achievements, and drive for leadership had been practically ignored, reminding her of the long journey she'd endured facing moments of injustice like this. In that moment, words from her mentor echoed in her memory. "Don't be afraid to face injustice head-on." This was her sign. She took a deep breath and decided not to leave without making an attempt to change the situation. Turning back to Jack, she met his gaze with the firmness and confidence that characterized her in the most serious business situations. "Are you sure you're not making hasty judgments?" she asked calmly, but with a clear undertone of challenge. "Perhaps you should consider all the facts before making decisions." Jack, who had mentally already shown her the door, was visibly caught off guard. His eyebrows raised slightly in surprise, but then he smirked, mistaking her words for an attempt to save face. He clearly had no idea who he was dealing with. "I think we have plenty of candidates who are a better fit for our team," he responded lazily, sighing and rubbing his forehead with exaggerated boredom, as if it pained him to keep the conversation going. His careless tone and arrogant behavior didn't faze Marina. She had long since learned how to handle people like him, and the determination in her eyes was unmistakable. She stepped forward and looked at Jack with the kind of authority that had always earned her respect in negotiations. "I believe we'll finish this conversation later," she said with icy confidence. "As I understand it, I have a meeting with the board of directors next week." Marina's words struck Jack like a bolt from the blue. His face paled, and for a few moments he froze, unsure how to respond. His usual arrogance vanished instantly, replaced by confusion and anxiety. He tried to gather his thoughts, but the realization of who stood before him triggered a panic he couldn't hide. Marina slowly turned and walked out, leaving Jack in stunned silence. This time she didn't rush. Her steps were as calm and confident as before, but now it was clear. Her test had been successful, and a more important conversation awaited her with those who truly mattered. A week later, Jack Pearson received an urgent invitation to a meeting with the company's board of directors. He knew this meeting was extremely important, but didn't anticipate that it would mark a turning point in his career. His mind was racing as he stepped into the spacious, well-lit conference room. However, what he saw stopped him dead in his tracks. At the head of the table, among the board members, sat Marina Watson. Jack froze at the doorway, his face draining of color, as he began to grasp the true nature of the situation. What he had assumed was a routine interview with a typical candidate turned out to be something far more serious. Standing before him now was not just an applicant, but the CEO of the company, the person he would be working for, or as he suddenly realized, perhaps not working for any longer. The board, which had been aware of Marina's covert assessment, sat quietly, observing her actions and waiting to see how she would handle the situation. Marina, maintaining her calm and inner peace, never took her eyes off Jack as he entered the room. Her resolve was visible in every movement. She knew this was the moment to expose Jack and demonstrate that the methods he employed were no longer acceptable in the company. "Jack," she began, her voice calm, but with an unmistakable note of sternness. "I think you need to reconsider your approach to dealing with candidates. Your behavior during the interview was unacceptable and violates the corporate values we have worked so hard to build." Her voice echoed through the room, making everyone present feel the gravity of the moment. Marina didn't raise her voice, but her words carried the weight and authority that made Jack feel an immediate threat to his career. He tried to think of something to say, but his mouth was dry and no words came. He realized that every step he had taken during that interview had been the wrong one. His bias and dismissive attitude toward Marina had been a fatal mistake. "We will discuss the next steps, but under different terms," Marina added, making it clear that his position in the company was now in jeopardy. These words felt like a final verdict. Jack, struggling to maintain any semblance of composure, realized he was no longer in control of the situation. There was no room for excuses or objections. Too much had been said and done. The board silently watched, clearly approving of Marina's actions. Jack, finally understanding the depth of his error, couldn't muster a single word. Every argument he might have used in different circumstances now seemed meaningless. Standing before him was a strong, confident woman, the CEO of the company he had discriminated against without even bothering to learn about her true achievements. As the meeting ended, Marina walked out of the room with her head held high. She had won a moral victory, showing that even in difficult situations, it's worth fighting for justice and not being afraid to expose those who abuse their positions to discriminate. This incident not only altered Jack's career, but also served as a lesson for the entire company. The bias he had exhibited not only jeopardized his own career, but also showed that such behavior could damage the reputation of an entire organization. This story spread among the employees and leadership, becoming a vivid example of how confronting injustice can transform an organization for the better.